Hello and welcome to another episode of Geopolitical Cousins. I am your cousin's cousin, producer Jacob. We are so back. After an extended hiatus with pneumonia that got this man down bad, Jacob Shapiro is back better than ever. Actually, he's on the mend. He's doing better than he was before. But he's not coughing as much. He's got his energy back, and we are diving right back in. So you guys don't want to hear my voice. I'm going to shut the up and let Jacob and Marko get at it.
I'm sure there's at least one listener out there, Marko. I did the mistake of, while I was sick, looking at some of the comments on some of our podcasts recently. And at least one guy, whose name is The Secrets of Pokemon, said that I was suffering from severe Trump derangement syndrome. So I just want Secrets of Pokemon to know that that's not what was wrong with me. I had pneumonia. And I really deeply related to Kevin Durant when I saw this post, because I wanted to get a burner account and go after this blog boy and tell him what an idiot he was. And then I realized this guy doesn't even have a blog. His name is Secrets of Pokemon, and he's putting comments on a YouTube channel. And that's fine. I don't have Trump derangement syndrome. But that's what I've been doing lately.
You know, I can totally see how there's a Venn diagram of Jacob haters that includes like Pokemon fans and Trump fans. I can see that. I can see how you would irk those people. You know, we're like too old school for the Pokemon. You're too much like Joe Johnson in Atlanta, period, kind of a thing. And then like you have Trump derangement syndrome. And so those two together like explode. And I'm just joking, obviously. You actually have pneumonia.
And you know, it's also, I guess I come by it honestly, because I always thought Pokemon was stupid. I always played Magic the Gathering. So we're getting really nerdy here, where I'm arguing that Magic is better than Pokemon. So.
Oh my God, Magic the Gathering? Yeah, no, they hate you. Bro, like, oh my God, they can smell this on you, the Pokemon fans, the Pokemon Trump.
There's also people in the Venn diagram who are, probably the vaccine skeptics, because one of the only things I truly have been outspoken about is I think that vaccines are good. Like, I think this news that Florida is planning to end all state vaccine mandates. I don't know if you saw that. Their state surgeon general announced that just yesterday on Wednesday. Like, I think that's absolutely asinine. I don't understand why we're killing all of ourselves, but I'm sure there's a subset of listeners who are like, Jacob took the mRNA vaccine, didn't he? That's why he's got pneumonia, because his lungs have been critically compromised. So,
I have to say I disagree with you, Jacob, on that one. And we should just start off there. I think that anyone who wants to end vaccine mandates for their children, God bless them. I believe in Charles Darwin. So I have no problem with it.
Yeah, I don't know. You need herd immunity to prevent these things. And it's also like, are they going to start restricting our access to vaccines? Because I hear you, as long as my kids can get the vaccines that I want and the other ones can't choose to, that's okay. But are we going to start losing the supply of vaccines because the vaccine mandates are gone, or because RFK Jr. says we just need vitamin A? This is actually very real because, I have an infant. She's 9 months old now. My wife graduated from Georgetown with a doctorate and wanted to walk at her graduation last May with our whole family. And we didn't feel like we could, because you don't get the MMR vaccine until you're 1 year old. And we didn't want to put our infant on an airplane because there was a measles outbreak in Washington, D.C. So I hear you. I'm all for the Darwinian, sure, let them eat cake or let them not have vaccines, as it were. But it's still going to affect us. I'm still fucking annoyed that they're inconveniencing me,
Let them eat measles. You know what? It's so funny because in a way, we're going to become like dog owners with our children. Like, oh, I'm so sorry. He hasn't had his vaccines. He can't play. Which, look, one thing I would say to you is this only affects you if you go to Florida, though. And, I don't know. I mean, I've never really been that impressed by Florida. So I'm okay.
Well, there's lots of different parts of Florida. Like Miami, I've never really loved. My grandparents were in West Palm Beach, like typical stereotypical Jewish grandparents. So maybe there's some, latent anti-Semitism. And I don't really like Florida. What's wrong with Florida, Marko? Do you have to, is there something wrong with Florida that you don't want to go? And then actually my grandparents' side of the family, they're from the Panhandle, which is basically just the South.
Oh, wow.
So anyway.
Okay. That's it. I did not know that. Okay. Well, look, in that case, you really do have a soft maybe spot for Florida, and you're unnerved by this. I only like Miami during Ultra, as good Euro would say. So yeah, I can just go to Shambhala in British
Yeah,
Columbia,
yeah.
I guess. I don't know. Like, although I'm too old for that. Okay. Anyways, glad to have you back. I mean, at the end of the day, it's also a little bit of my fault. I mean, I could have just jumped and recorded an individual session. I just don't think that
Well,
really works.
I'm sure
First
that
of all,
I'm
I just
sure
don't.
that Secrets of
I just don't.
Pokemon would have really appreciated that because he says he goes through my stuff at 2x. So for him, you should do it. You know.
No, but I just have to apologize to everyone. I am a tech Luddite, so like without Jacob here, I can't even like really record it. So you know what? I don't know. I waited for you, but I'm also disappointed you revealed why we haven't recorded. We could have just done what everybody else does and pretended that we had an incredible August worth of summer vacationing around the world. I mean, that's what all the sports podcasts do. Bill Simmons was out for like the entirety of August. Zach Lowe. I mean, everybody just takes August off. And I really thought before you got sick, I was just scheming in my head. I remember every August, I have nothing to work out to. There's no podcast, And I was like, oh man, we're going to fill that void. And then bam,
Yeah.
you almost die. And I was like, oh, no,
Well,
too bad.
No,
Okay,
I'm glad you brought
we're
that up
here.
though, because that's another thing that you and I haven't caught up about. Did you see this bombshell report about Russillo leaving the Ringer?
Yeah, I can't
It's
believe
not
that.
confirmed yet, but maybe he's going to start
That's-
some new digital production company backed by like David Portnoy and Barstool. And by the way, hope y'all are listening to Barstool. That's great. But yeah, like my guy, like you're Simmons and I'm Russillo. Like it looks like the band's breaking up. So yeah, just.
You know how this is though. Like they're still gonna guest star on each other as long as they do together that once a week thing during the season. Like that's fine.
Yeah.
That's perfectly cool.
Unless Zach Lowe has replaced him. I don't know.
Ooh, yeah, it's a musical chairs in the talent industry. And by the way, I think this is going to get on a serious note. I think this is going to get better and better, or worse and worse, depending on what your perspective is. I guess for talent, it's better and better. And the reason for that is that I do think one of the things that AI might do is it might make it really difficult for anyone to become kind of a superstar. That's one of the challenges of the AI revolution. Every CEO on the planet is looking to cut junior analyst, sort of that junior entry position. And I get that, it's profit margin maximizing. The problem with that is that 10 years forward, you're going to be locked in when nobody got to be, a Jacob Shapiro or a Ryan Russillo. Because how did Jacob Shapiro start? Well, the same way Marko started. We were all at one point interns. We were all at one point junior analysts. And then we were junior analysts probably for too long while we were doing senior analyst work. Like we all know how this works. And then you get mad and then you go and then you like spread your wings. And that's just the circle of life. But if the circle of life is interrupted by a CEO who's like hiring freeze and junior analysts, 10 years from now, there's not going to be anyone who can become a Ryan Russillo in their 30s. And then Ryan Russillo is just going to make $20 million a year because he has no competition. And what's funny about this is that in 10 to 15 years, the AI race might actually shrink profit margins because somebody still has to deliver the product. And that means you're going to have to pay Ryan Russillo probably 7 times more than he would have been worth had there been a bunch of young whippersnappers nipping at his Achilles
Well, yeah,
heel.
and I think this also dovetails with the idea, you used to be able to just go on the internet, and if you had good content, like people would find you. That's how Bill Simmons became Bill Simmons. He just started writing a column, and people liked the column and could find him. And it was still an enjoyable experience to go on the internet and find something cool and read it. And like, it's not like that anymore. You can't find shit anymore on the internet. And I think increasingly people are going to these walled gardens where, they're subscribing to the Substack and paying some fee or getting, behind a password protected thing in order to get the information that they want,
But Jacob, why is that? Because that doesn't seem to be an AI issue. You're talking about something else now. Because you're right. I've noticed even BBC has put up a paywall, which was very surprising to me because I thought BBC was a government-run agency that just provided news. But apparently now they have a paywall. Everything else. So I agree with you, but that's separate from my AI point, which means that like cheap content is AIized, whatever, so there's no real entry level jobs for talent in our industry. And our industry, I'm saying broadly speaking, not the finance bros, because on this podcast, we're not really finance bros. On this podcast, we are really entertainers and just content producers. So we are in the same industry as Bill Simmons or Zach Lowe. So in that industry, I think that AI is going to undermine the junior talent. But you're actually speaking about something else, which I've also noticed. And it's important for this podcast because our whole point of this podcast is to kind of educate and entertain on geopolitics. And you're right. There's so much less free content. Why is that? What's happened?
Well, and I think you're right that it's not only AI. It's been going on for some time. I just think AI is the death knell because now there's going to be so much AI generated content out there that even if you, like, let's say you're right, like the junior analyst position is going away and so you don't get trained. In the late 90s, early 2000s, you could do what Bill Simmons did, which is start a blog and people find you and people read you. But try starting a blog now. Nobody's going to pay attention because there is so much other stuff out there. You're completely inundated with these things and AI is just going to put out more and more stuff. So you can't go directly to the people. You can't get trained at a company and like get the skills that you need and work your way slowly up. So I think you're right. I think you're just reaching this dearth of things. And I also want, like maybe I'm reaching too far here, but just look at our politicians. Like we've got 70 and 80-year-olds all over the place. It's people with brand recognition already who are becoming politicians. The thing with the Democrats was, I think a lot of people knew that Joe Biden didn't have his marbles and wasn't going to be a formidable candidate. But who were they going to pick? Like Kamala was the next biggest brand name, but there was no other brand name because even in politics, this is happening. There are no juniors. There are no rising stars. There are no up and comers. Maybe I'm reaching a little bit there, but I don't know. I feel like there's.
I think that might be it might be a reach, but I think that it speaks to something else. I think you can also go to movies. Why do we keep doing remake? To the point where we're doing remakes of movies I would have thought would have never seen remade. Like you're gonna laugh at me at this, but I haven't gone to a movie theater in like 3 years, and I asked my wife that we go because I wanted to just zone out, and she was like, "Well, there's nothing playing." I was like, "I don't care, just pick something." And so we went and saw Nobody 2.
Yeah.
Yes, the nickname is appropriate, Jacob, because it was absolutely astonishingly bad. I was like, how did this get made? And you know how it got made? Nobody won, did surprisingly well at the box office. So the Hollywood studios were like, whatever, let's redo it. And that I think shows that sort of culture. South Park made fun of this, when all the Star Wars came out. It's just this, a lack of, not originality. I think that our generation and Gen Z generation, we're obviously both millennials, Gen Z's behind us. I do think people are creative in our generations, but the people who make decisions don't have really the time or the appetite for risk to take any of those creations seriously. So what gets promoted, what gets risen to the top is just reruns, and Joe Biden was a rerun. I mean, man has ran for president since like the 70s, for God's sakes. He was a rerun. Donald Trump 2.0. It's like the Republican Party had no original ideas either. So they reran another guy who, I guess next to Joe Biden looked young and spry. And then over the weekend, we're like, oh my God, Trump is old. It's like, he's always been old. Like he was old in 2016. And so, I think I don't know what it is, but I think it's everywhere. And I think that eventually we're just going to get sick and tired of it. And then there's going to be a break. So that's where I would disagree with you a little bit. I think that there's a structural technical reason why in the world of talent, it's going to be tough to be young. But I think in politics, eventually people will revolt. I think we'll just elect a 32-year-old fascist, and that'll be interesting.
Well, maybe last thing on this before we get into the geopolitics more. But I mean, I've been sitting on my ass for 3 weeks. For 2 weeks, I really couldn't think about the world. And so I was catching up on a bunch of things. And I was saving Andor for just such a thing because I loved season 1. This is the Star Wars. If you haven't watched Andor, you should go watch Andor. And I just finished season 2 while I was sick. And to your point, Star Wars has put out all of these different movies and they're rehashing this and they're doing CGI of dead Carrie Fisher and CGI of Moff Tarkin and all these things. But Andor was completely different. There are no Jedi in Andor, and it was basically trying to build up to the Rogue One movie. And it's the best, like not just from Star Wars, it's like the best television I've watched in years. It's like truly incredible. So there is space for content. Now, to your point, for Andor to happen, the old lady, I shouldn't call her that, I'm sorry. I believe her name is Kathleen Kennedy. Is that who it is who runs Lucasfilm? She's a Kennedy or something like that. She's an older woman,
Yes.
a distinguished older woman who hired, Tony Gilroy.
Yeah. No, produced every movie you love. If you don't know who she is, like every movie you love, she produced.
And Tony Gilroy,
Everyone.
like after Rogue One, basically sent her a memo that was like, I want to do this story about Cassian Andor. And she basically just gave him the keys. She was like, cool, go do it. And you get this incredible piece of content. And to your point, like that's not usually how it works in Hollywood right now. Usually it's nobody did something do well, we have to remake it. But if you give somebody who's really good at this shit the keys and you give them resources, they can still create content. So there's still things out there. And I think human beings will crave stories like all the more so. So I don't know, that I've just had that on my mind too. I don't know if you've seen Andor.
No, I haven't. I have seen the first season. It was awesome, and but I would also say that's because Diego Luna is
he's a boss.
Absolute boss.
He's totally a boss.
You know, like that's the. I mean, I have a huge crush on him. He was. By the way, if you want to watch him at his best, I think Narcos Mexico was just so good. It was such a good show. Anyways, we are now.
Well, no, and I just want to say, like you have the man crush on Diego Luna. I just have to say, I don't even know what her name is, but I just have like proper male crush on the person who played Mon Mothma. So, I mean, wow, just incredible. You should watch season 2. But yes, we should stop talking about which fictional characters in the Star Wars universe we have crushes on. That's probably not why people are here. Okay, well, how about we start here? Because, and I want listeners to be a little gentle with me, although Secrets of Pokemon will continue to hold my feet to the fire. Consider me like Rumpelstiltskin. Like, I've been trying to catch up really quickly, but I've basically been offline. Well, that was one of my questions. I think there's one thing that's going on. But the first thing I wanted to say was, I believe in our last episode, or our second to last episode before I got sick, you brought up the notion that, all of these leaders that we're talking about, Trump, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, they're really old. And in 10, 15 years, the politics of this might completely change. Or maybe you said this in our leaders draft or whatever. And I thought it was incredibly apropos because I'm sure you saw this thing that is just dominating the headlines today, the hot mic moment between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. And I think Xi Jinping is getting dragged into this a little bit unfairly because it's clearly Putin who's obsessed with this, about longevity and talking about like, oh, I can get continuous organ transplants and I can live till I'm 150. Like one of the Xi Jinping quotes, like as he's listening to this, Xi like says, "It's our shared hope that the elderly can be cared for." So I sort of had the sense that she was like, okay, Vladimir, like that's really cool. But
well, I think she was like rolling his eyes hard on this.
But Vladimir Putin is like talking about how he could live until he's 150. And I immediately got a letter from one of our listeners that was like, can you talk about this all from the point of view of leaders, but also from the point of view of society and people living till they're 150? So I just wanted to say, like, you very eerily like foreshadowed what is directly on, at least on Vladimir Putin's mind, and is maybe on the minds of some of these dictators with those comments.
Well, I mean, Xi and Vlad are spring chicken. I mean, they're youthful and energetic compared to some of the other leaders. They are both 72 years old. So, they're going to be with us for at least another 10 years, according to the average lifespan of a world leader. But I would say that another absolute legend, absolute leader, master of his craft, just died today.
Oh, yeah.
Giorgio Armani died at 91 years old. And I'm just going to tell Vlad, if Giorgio couldn't extend his lifespan with all his money and his awesomeness and being surrounded by gorgeous, beautiful young people every day, which I think is the only elixir to life, well, then you're not going to outlive Giorgio Armani, buddy. Like, you know what I mean? I can't imagine anyone having like a more conducive lifestyle to extending their life than Giorgio Armani. So no, you guys are screwed. You're all gonna die. And by the way, what's interesting to me is that conversation between Xi and Vlad is probably replicated more in Silicon Valley more than anywhere else. As we all know, tech bros are obsessed with longevity. Many dream and fantasize about being fused with AI. Like, I've personally had conversations with billionaire tech bros about that. I'm not kidding. These are facts. And I think that, this is what you do when you reach that level of power. What else are you going to do? Like, what else are you going to do? You're going to try to extend your life. And so I'm not surprised by that hot mic. And yes, I do think that Xi Jinping's answer, he just seems like, here in the West, we have a very propaganda-filled view of Xi as some sort of like a Maoist psychopath. But he seems a lot more grounded than any of these dictators in his shoes. And I think part of the reason for that is that I think that in the West, mainly thanks to our own propaganda, we look at Russia and China as the same. And I was just talking to a client yesterday about, why China has not undertaken a military reunification with Taiwan. And I think one of the reasons is that the Chinese policymakers, although they have, I think wrongly, ended the meritocracy of the Chinese Communist Party, and I think that was a mistake. I think that was one of their advantages. There was still meritocratic competition. You needed to prove yourself in provinces before you challenged for federal leadership and so on. I do think that they at least monitor the social media in China for what the people want. I think that they do care about the median quote unquote voter in China. I think that in some ways that makes China almost a direct democracy. And the reason I say that is because in China, the internet and social media is not censored. It's not. It is monitored. Those are two very big differences. So in other words, if you start posting Winnie the Pooh memes, yes, you will go directly to jail for sure in China. That's a reference to this idea that Xi Jinping kind of looks like Winnie the Pooh. So if you're a critic of Xi Jinping, you're going to post some Winnie the Pooh memes. Yeah, sure, that will flag you. They'll take you to jail for sure. Okay, fine. But everything else, if you say hey, my air is polluted in Tianjin, no, you're not going to jail. That's noted. And if 1 million people say it, then the government does something about that. If you say hey, zero COVID really sucks, and enough people say it for a long enough time, guess what happens? The government changes its policy on this. And so I think the difference between Putin and Xi is that Putin does not do that. He just sends you to jail, or he sends you now to the front in Ukraine to die. And I think that distinction was reflected in that conversation that you aptly pointed out. The tone of the two of them was different. Putin is dreaming of harvesting young, probably alive people's organs, whereas she is yeah, elderly care is important for stability of society. Okay, buddy, but you do you, Vlad.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a backhanded insult, right? Because he's basically calling Putin elderly. He's yeah, I hope that the elderly are cared in all forms of society, Vladimir, which is...
Well, it was that. I mean, he's also telling him dude, this isn't about you. This is about a society that's aging, and how do we take care of the elderly? That's and the fact that this was a hot mic, where she actually comes out looking like a leader of a country. Mm-hmm. And Vlad looks like a vampire. Being I want to harvest young, fresh organs. And she's so, yeah, how do we take care of an aging society is a good question. No, that's not what I meant. I meant I want to harvest young organs for me. And she's oh, okay. And it's the fact that he's reprimanding him in private is I wonder if this is how it goes with Ukraine too, it's but anyways, look, the point of all this is, this leads us into probably the topic you missed, which is, of course, you and I have rocketed to superstardom after the Tianjin summit. You and I are, of course, the multipolarity boys. We are. And we have been accused of being anti-American because of it, the left-leaning Jew and some random Eurotrash talking about how America's not number one. Who else would undermine hegemony? Of course it would be the two of them. We're basically Bolsheviks.
Pretty much.
I mean, right? Appropriate. Boom. Historical knowledge. If all this, you know what that means. Eventually, I will stab Jacob with an ice pick.
That's fine. I love Trotsky.
But
I'm happy to be Snowball in this metaphor. It's good.
I mean, by the way, Trotsky, like, if you're gonna be anyone from the Bolshevik Revolution, like, who had a better life at the end? I mean, you know, like, so Stalin won, but did he really win? He's freezing his ass off in Moscow. Trotsky's like, you know, having sex with Frida Kahlo in Mexico, man. Like, let's go. Like, that's. Anyways, sorry for that segue. Like, that maybe 70% of our listeners didn't get, but it's okay. Watch the incredible Frida Kahlo movie. What I'm getting at is that multipolarity is something that I've been very passionate about. I've been trying to convince my clients for the last 15 years that American hegemony is over. And for those of you who didn't catch our first conversation about this, just really quickly, political scientists divide the state of the world into unipolarity, where one country is in charge, like a bully in a schoolyard. It's actually a very, very safe and peaceful schoolyard. You want somebody to be in charge. You want somebody to be a bully, actually, from a stability perspective. A bipolar world is when there's two bullies. They divide a schoolyard into two halves. Fights occasionally emerge. They get pretty nasty because the two sides of the schoolyard could go to a big fight against one another. But the two hegemons kind of keep everything under wraps. And then there's a multipolar world, which seems fair because there's no bullies in the schoolyard. No, not zero. But that just means fights break out all the time, uncontrollably. And so Jacob and I have been talking about this for a long time, and then it reached a cacophony after this Tianjin summit. Everyone's now on the multipolarity train. And I want to pump the brakes a little, Jacob.
It's time to be contrarian. You know? It's uncomfortable when people are agreeing with us.
Yeah, everyone's like now like, oh yeah. And one thing that really unnerved me the most is I don't know how many interviews I had to do. Is India getting closer to China? It's like, no, it's not. It's not. I think India and China, as we discussed before, we noted, I think last year, they started to actually try to solve their border disputes. I think India has a lot of reasons why it should have a better relationship with China. India's future is in low value-added manufacturing. It's a very poor country still. India's future is not call centers, which will all be replaced by AI. It is not assembling iPhones. It's high value-add manufacturing. That's not what can employ hundreds of millions of Indians who need good jobs. It is low value-add manufacturing. India's future is to become China's China. It is the only future India has. And so finally, India's realized that it needs that intellectual property transfer from China. And the intellectual property I'm talking about is how do you refine nickel? How do you refine rare earths? How do you roll steel? Although they already kind of know how to do that. But the point is, that's why, yes, their relationship is improving. And I think this Tianjin summit would have happened even if President Harris had won. So I think that there was a little bit too quick of a move by everyone, every commentator in the world, to place the blame for this Shanghai Cooperation Summit that happened in China, where Putin, Modi, also leaders of Southeast Asian economy, like there was a lot of people there. It wasn't just them. And there was this perception that somehow all these people met together because of Donald Trump. I think they would have met together anyways. And we would have just made a much less of a deal because of it. But, you know, it's okay because I do think we are in a multipolar world and it's fine for people finally to realize that this is happening. It also supports another one of our themes that we kind of riffed on, which is summitry. Remember when we talked about how summits are back, congresses are back? I think this just shows that, like the UN is not a place where anything happens. This is now all about these personal relationships between leaders.
There's a lot to unpack there. There's a couple things I want to say in response to what you said. The first is just, I want to go back to the point about Chinese monitoring and censorship. I think you're right that China monitors, but they absolutely censor. If you go searching for Tiananmen Square on Chinese internet, you're not going to find anything.
I know, but that's an extreme though. What I meant, obviously they're going to hide Tiananmen Square. When I say they don't censor, I mean that if you criticize the government, they do not censor that. You can absolutely criticize the government in China on social media as long as it's about a particular policy and its consequences. It's not like the Communist Party is illegitimate. Boom, that's censored, you go to jail. I agree. As I said, if you post a Winnie the Pooh meme, you go to jail. But if you say like, there's pollution in my town, there's corruption in my town, the real estate crisis has caused me to lose a lot of my wealth, that's unfair. Like those things, they monitor and then they try to actually fix it. With a heavy-handed way that I think ultimately doesn't fix things, but that's what I mean. And the reason I point this out is not to say that China is as healthy of a democracy as America. What I'm trying to say is that China is not Russia, and that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are running a very different
and that was
country.
the second thing I wanted to say, because this is actually something that keeps me up a little bit late at night. And it's to your point about, I also get the endless questions from clients about when is China going to invade Taiwan and how should we position ourselves in our portfolios for the Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And I actually, and this is one of the areas where I sometimes worry that geopolitics falls short, because geopolitics is a methodology created in 19th century Europe to explain the behavior of nation states. And so it really does explain well how European states behave, how the United States behaves, how Russia behaves. It's almost like designed to explain a country like Russia. China has a different foreign policy heritage, and China thinks about global politics in a very different way than Westerners and Europeans in the 19th century did. So they're not going to look at foreign policy or the question of Taiwan the same way that Russia's going to look at the problem of Ukraine. I've tried to bring this out by making direct comparisons between, look at what China did to Hong Kong and look at how they might replicate that strategy on Taiwan. That's the sort of thing that they do. It's really trite to, go to your Sun Tzu and start quoting, things from Sun Tzu, but it actually is relevant, because if you read some of what that stuff looks like or what it sounds like, it's all about, we don't want to fight the battle. If we have to fight the battle, we've already lost. We want to create fait accomplis, and then we want to come in politically, and only as a very, very, very last-ditch effort, if we're completely desperate, do we want to break the handle and start doing things militarily. And so sometimes I think if you go too, I think geopolitics can accommodate China, and I think that there are universal lessons from the methodology to explain Chinese government behavior, but you really do have to put yourself in a completely different foreign policy tradition if you want to understand Chinese moves, or Japanese moves, or Indian moves. It's sort of short there. And then the last thing actually two more things, and these are both questions. I wondered if you saw, because I saw the summit and the parade and everything else in the hot mic moment. I did notice that Kim Jong-un and Xi Jinping talked today for the first time in 6 years. And I sat up in my chair a little bit on that. That was okay. I've been joking with people, we've had Venezuela, and maybe we should talk about Venezuela with the bombing of the drug guys there in the last week. We've had Israel-Palestine. We've had Iran. North Korea is just sitting there at the end of the year. Are we going to get a full bingo card for the year? Because I can't imagine that Kim Jong-un is happy that all these other rogue states are hogging the headlines and he's not getting anything. And lo and behold, there he's having a conversation with Xi. But the last thing I just wanted to say was, I think you're right to say that we shouldn't over-index on India being closer to China. But to me, the one thing that has happened while I've been offline, while I've been sick, it's not that India is getting closer to China, but it's that there has been a break in India-US relations. And that, I think, is directly related to the US government policy. US government, going back to Bush, has been all about improving relations with India, trying to get the democracies closer, trying to get them less non-aligned and more on the line of the West. I've also been thinking about this. I'm reading this incredible book. I don't know if you've heard of this one. The Anarchy, The Relentless Rise of the East India Company by William Dalrymple. I forget which, one of our listeners recommended it to me, and it's been absolutely fascinating. But so I've just sort of had India on the mind in general. And India was moving that direction. They were moving closer to the United States. They were having border clashes with China. They were thinking, maybe we'll get the intellectual property from the United States. And some people might think, well, then why are they buying Russian oil? Why the fuck are we buying Russian fertilizer and all the things that we're buying from Russia too? Why are the Germans still selling cars to Russia via Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan and all these other transshipment places? The hypocrisy of that is absolutely incredible. And the idea that you're going to slap 50% tariffs on India for this while you cozy up to Pakistan, which is India's greatest fear, and you're going to talk about how you use tariffs to end the India-Pakistan war of earlier this year. I just think that there is actually something that happened in the last couple of weeks, and the thing that happened is the United States basically spit in India's face. Now, maybe India is pragmatic enough to say, like the Europeans, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, we need to deal with the United States. We're going to figure it out. Yes, we'll reach out to, Lukashenko and Xi Jinping and Putin and some of these others. But yeah, I don't think it's about India becoming closer to China. I think India always knew that it needed to have a pragmatic relationship with China. But I think 20 years of progress in India-U.S. relations, with the U.S. thinking of India as a way of buttressing its power in the Indo-Pacific, it's gone. They flushed it down the toilet, and they flushed it down the toilet for I'm not exactly sure what. I'm sure Secrets of Pokemon is self-immolating right now because he's like, I knew he had Trump derangement syndrome. It only took 34 minutes for him to criticize the Trump administration. Well, okay, fine. Like, you just screwed it up. The British Empire got a second lease on life because of India, and we just said, no thanks. Like, I don't get it. Anyway, so go ahead.
No, I think you've been, I've seen your posts on X, and you've been sort of banging the table, like why? Like why is the US, doing this? Why is it highlighting the things that India is doing wrong when there's a lot of things that India is doing right from a geopolitical perspective? And I think that, I agree with you. I think that this could have been done with a lot more tact. And the weirdest part is the Pakistan angle, because there's nothing that the U.S. gains from that. There's just nothing. Pakistan has, I'm not saying that you should label Pakistan as an enemy or anything like that. It's just, you don't have to necessarily, cozy up to Pakistan. I think they have to be cozy enough with you. So I think that you're correct. I think this is one of the own goals of the Trump administration. And I think it comes down to the fact that sometimes they paint the world with way too broad of a brush, meaning that current account, like a trade surplus with a country good, trade deficit bad. You are screwing us over. And India still remains a relatively poor country, so it's going to have a trade surplus with you. And ultimately, who cares? It's not relevant for a slew of other issues you're trying to do with India. Also, we sell quite a few services to the country anyways, so if we actually properly looked at it, I'm not even sure what the math would say. But anyways, the point is, I agree with you. I think this is something that's come out of this. And so I think that Modi's visit to Tianjin, to China, is correctly maybe overblown, given the context of the last 6 weeks, where U.S. and India have had a real break in their relations. Now, I do think that they're going to sit down. And one of the things that I would say is that it's so stupid by the U.S. to do what it has done that it will correct itself. And so I do think it can be corrected because India is pragmatic. It's just that the price at which it gets corrected might be higher than the U.S. would have wanted. And I just always go back to that statement, that Indian foreign minister made back in 2022. I think he was at some summit in Slovakia, some security summit, and he was being pushed on the issue of China and Russia. And like, why is India not aligning itself with the U.S.? Why is it sitting on a fence? Was the direct accusation. And his answer, which was incredible, was India is not sitting on a fence. India is sitting on its interests. And so this is the way I've defined, India's performance over the last couple of months, is that India is probably performing the best from, like, if we were judging foreign policy of every country, India gets the top marks. And I've been very critical of India from an economic perspective, from a development perspective. I actually think a lot of the reforms that Modi has done have fallen far short. India has not gained any export market share globally at all over the last 10 years. So just put that into your pipe and smoke it. This nonsense about iPhone assembly, who cares? That's not what India needs to do. So there's a lot of things that I think that India has not done well, and it can do much better. But one thing that India gets top marks for is how do you perform foreign policy ballet in a multipolar environment, and it's by being promiscuous. And a lot of countries have to take a page out of India's book and realize that in this world of multipolarity, there are no steadfast allies. You might be allied with the US on issue X, but on issue Y, you might actually be allied with, China against the US. And India understands that more than anyone else. The countries that don't understand this, and then they get disappointed are Europeans and Australians, who are like, oh my God, but Americans abandoned us. And it's like, well, no, you should have never put a ring on your finger and expected the US to be a reliable and a stable partner. Because in a world of multipolarity, there's just no real friends or enemies. There's just interest. And I think India figured that out several years ago.
Yeah. While we've been chatting, President Trump posted a meme of him in the Cracker Barrel logo, and him and the Uncle Cracker guy like dancing in the meme. And just to sort of assuage the people who think I have Trump derangement syndrome, round of applause for what President Trump helped with the Cracker Barrel logo. I can't believe how much marketing dollars were spent making that shitty other logo. As somebody who deeply loves Cracker Barrel as a Southerner, like really happy that we're going back to our roots there. So see, I can find some positives in President Trump's policies. Marko, do we need to talk about Venezuela? For listeners who don't know, yesterday the U.S. military struck a vessel that was coming from Venezuela that was allegedly carrying, illegal narcotics and drugs. 11 people killed. President Trump, I'll quote him, "There's more where that came from. We have a lot of drugs pouring into our country, coming in for a long time. These come out of Venezuela." So in the first Trump administration, you might remember that the U.S. tried regime change in Venezuela. It wasn't quite Bay of Pigs. It was like Bay of Pigs light, but it didn't go well. That's when we got Juan Guaido and sort of that chapter of Venezuelan history. And I think maybe, Marko, this might also dovetail with that incredible chart that you posted on X about Trump's approval rating on selected issues, like going towards immigration and drugs and things like that. I think maybe you'll take it that direction. But do we need to talk about this? Do you think that this is highly significant?
Well, let's take it in both directions. We've been offline for a while, so I think we should both assess the Trump presidency right now and also discuss this issue. So I have heard a lot of narratives out there about regime change. Axios had a article where they basically interviewed a number of White House officials who said that, yes, we are going to do regime change in Venezuela. Well, I'm here to tell you, no, you're not. Not with a nuclear submarine and a bunch of frigates and destroyers. Just as you and I were very adamant that you cannot do regime change in Iran with fighter jets, similarly, even less so can you do it with super duper expensive submarines. It just doesn't work. Yes, there's 4,500 Marines on various ships put together that are, steaming towards Venezuela as we speak. 4,500 Marines are not going to invade a country of 30 million. So the only way that this flotilla could help, create regime change in Venezuela is if there is somebody willing in Venezuela within the military to have regime change. And then, look, the White House has access to human intelligence, signals intelligence, all sorts of intelligence. Maybe they have some colonel, some young, ready to rule guy, ready to go. But I don't know that. And so I'm just going to say that this is a show of force just for the sake of a show of force. Now, that said, Venezuela has been extremely naughty, not just in terms of sending immigrants towards the U.S., not just in terms of, yes, aiding and abetting, drug shipments, but also in threatening its neighbors, which is a faux pas on the Western hemisphere. This doesn't happen unless it's U.S. threatening Canada. But we'll leave this aside. We'll leave that aside. Other than that, Venezuela basically threatened Guyana's independence and its access to some of its newly discovered oil fields. Now, most of Guyana's
I just want you to underscore that, because the United States did not give a shit about Guyana until they had what Exxon described, I believe in 2017, 2018, I forget, but as a fairy tale oil discovery that they found there. And now Guyana's it's going to become one of the richest countries per capita in the entire world. I went down this rabbit hole last year because I was like, how do you express an investment thesis in Guyana? Because it's gonna blow up. But
really,
I guess
just buy real estate. This is, by the way, that you just buy real estate. That's when you don't know, you just buy real estate. I think that's the way to do it. And look, Guyana, their offshore, their production is offshore. And so it was always really hilarious when Venezuela would threaten it, because it's like, well, you need a navy to do that, Brazil obviously said, no, we're not going to let you do that. That's crazy. And so there was that. But maybe, maybe a good show of force would be for President Trump to just sink Venezuela's entire navy, while it's like docked, and say, there you go. You're not going to get to upset Guyana's offshore production. The point is, Venezuela has been a bad actor in the region. It's been annoying. And so on one hand, it's not a bad idea to kind of just like remind it, like, hey man, there's consequences to being annoying and a bad actor. On the other hand, this is not regime change. It cannot be regime change. And President Trump has been very clear. He doesn't want to send American troops on wild goose chases of regime change. I mean, that's one of his, I would say, key platforms that probably about 30-40% of his voters actually voted for him on. And so, no, I don't think there's going to be regime change in Venezuela. Like, certainly not with this array of military equipment. Sometimes journalists, not sometimes, most of the time, journalists don't know what they're talking about. And I mean, somebody has to just ask a question like, what does it take for regime change? What it takes is men with guns on streets. Period. 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 Other than the case of Serbia in 1999, which led to October 2000 revolution some 18 months later, there's really no case. And by the way, in that case, Serbia was bombed by the largest military alliance in the history of humanity, right? So like, let's pump the brakes a little. It's not like Israel bombed Iran. Other than in that one case 26 years ago, 25 years ago, every single regime change requires men with guns on streets, period. And so if the U.S. is not willing to do that in Venezuela, it's not going to be regime change. It's going to be just a reminder. And I would say that both the White House dreams of regime change in Venezuela are silly, but also saying that a show of force to Venezuela is inappropriate, I think is silly as well. Yeah, it is appropriate. They've been annoying. They need to be told to stop it.
Another book I just finished. It's The Fish That Ate the Whale. Have you heard of this book? It's about Samuel Zemurray, who is this, he's a banana guy. He was in New Orleans. He eventually helped take over United Fruit. Just like a really, really fascinating guy. And I forget what year it was. Was it the 20s or maybe it was earlier or later? My years are a little bit off. But he had a bunch of banana farms in Honduras, and the government was taking away some of the concessions that they had given him. And bananas are like very, very low margin. So if you take away some of the tax breaks, like it was just going to wipe him out. So he lived in New Orleans. He went down to the French Quarter, found, apparently there were haunts where old Latin American generals and former dictators would just hang out in the French Quarter in New Orleans. He found a former Honduran general, got him on some of his banana boats, sent him to Honduras with some thugs, and took over the Honduran government. Like just installed his own guy and did it that way.
So I know where this is going.
Okay.
I know where this is going. You're both shitting on my thesis that it's difficult to do regime change. Appropriate. On the other hand, men with guns on the ground.
Well, yeah.
Right?
It was Honduras, and it only took like a few men with guns. And I'm also just really sad that you used to be able to go down to the quarter apparently and find a former Honduran dictator who'd be willing to take over the country for you. And now I go down to the quarter, I'm like trying to avoid piss and vomit and things like that. Also, I don't know if you saw this, President Trump saying that he might deploy federal troops to New Orleans, not Chicago next, because of our crime problem down here. So New Orleans in the crosshairs. But to your point, I just want to underscore this too. Like the Trump administration tried regime change in Venezuela without the men with guns in the first administration. They recognized Juan Guaido as the official prime minister of Venezuela and thought that the Venezuelan people would rise up and that they were going to support whoever was going to rise up and do it. And it didn't work. And so now they're dealing with sort of the same dictator. Go ahead.
Look, I think the alternative approach here is just a gunboat diplomacy. I think this is it's appropriate approach, actually. Look, at the end of the day, regime change is always going to be problematic if it's aided from outside. The best regime change, the most potent one, is homegrown. That's it. And so, I think that there will be regime change in Venezuela because this country has completely, collapsed. And eventually people will rise up, or some colonel will, and then the U.S. can step in and ensure that the directionality ideologically of that administration aligns with it. Okay, that's normal course of business. I don't think the U.S. Should aid in regime change in Venezuela. Let it happen on its own. But is it appropriate to slap a country in your hemisphere around? Every other country would do that. Russia would do that. China would do that. It's like, yeah, of course it is. Like, show force and say, no, you can't cross these red lines or we'll just sink your navy. and next time we'll bomb your whole Air Force. Low cost. Yeah, call them. So like Trump did with Iran. Hey, make sure the janitors are out of order. Are they safe? Yes. Okay, now we're going to pulverize it. Cool. That is just, I think that's where Donald Trump gets my highest marks. This limited, brutal, quick show of power that just reminds these countries like, look, you guys can continue being whatever regime you want, but here's my red lines. Don't cross them. We're cool. Okay, done. So let's see. Let's see where this goes. Because again, if it goes from that gunboat diplomacy, limited show of force into regime change, then yeah, I do think it's silly because it's 30 million people, large military. They're not going to, unless there's somebody on the inside, I don't think there will be regime change. And as you pointed out, there wasn't. Which leads us to our second question that you posed, which is, what is popular that Trump is doing? And so I posted this diagram that I have that you can share maybe in the show notes, which I think is an appropriate thing to observe. It is President Trump's popularity by issue. So there is a poll. It is a Harvard-Harris poll, I believe, that basically asks, voters out of the many issues that President Trump is pursuing, where is the popularity? So it is a Harvard-Harris poll. Yeah, Harvard-Harris poll. I'm sure that all the Trump fans are going to be like, Harvard-Harris, just shut up. Okay, it's a poll. Relax. Polls don't matter. Shut up. Just whatever. If you want, add 5% to each issue in favor of Trump, if it makes you feel better. It's still useful directionally. So the issues are the economy, immigration, foreign affairs, administering the government, handling inflation, reducing cost of government, returning America to its values, tariffs and trade policy, and then fighting crime in American cities. So immigration and fighting crime in American cities is probably the two most controversial ones if you watch the news. You've got ICE running around American cities, picking up supposedly illegal immigrants, but they're also picking up American citizens on occasion. Yes, by mistake. Yes, I know, but still, and then fighting crime in American cities, where President Trump has obviously, enlisted National Guard. And so that's controversial, and it's been deemed illegal in terms of using it in Los Angeles by one of the courts, which I'm sure is going to be overturned at the Supreme Court, but whatever. The point here is that these two issues are actually performing the best. President Trump has 50% approval rating on immigration. He's had it hover around 50%. He was 56% in February of 2025. It's still in the green, if you will. And on fighting crime in American cities, the Harris Harvard poll only started polling that as an issue in August, and he is at 51%. And so what I would say is that the media narrative that, ICE is a armed militia loyal to President Trump, picking up American citizens, and the National Guard has taken over law enforcement, and that's, a slippery slope towards authoritarianism. That narrative is not resonating actually with voters. Voters actually have 51% approval on that. Now, if you don't like Trump, you're going to counter by saying, well, it's 51%. It's not high. Yes, but hold on. Let me give you some other issues. On handling inflation, President Trump is at only 41% approval rating. It's dropped from 45% at the beginning of his term to 41%. And on tariffs and trade, most importantly, he was always in the doldrums at 41%. So in other words, ICE picking up American citizens around American cities and National Guard performing law enforcement duties is 10% higher in support than inflation and tariffs. I'm not here to judge this. This is a no comment. This is just an objective fact. I'm just presenting these facts to you. Why? Because I'm trying to forecast the future for our listeners. One of the questions that I get a lot from clients is like, what's next? What's the next 12 months going to look like? Well, if I was President Trump's advisor, I would be in the White House right now with this poll saying like, look, the tariffs, terrible. That's a political own goal. Like, you need to STFU on this stuff, Mr. President. Like, it's over. Yeah, but Mexico and Canada next year, USMCA. Yeah, no, you're going to let them roll that over, buddy. Okay? Yeah, Canada has a 5% across the board tariff. I'm sorry, but Canada won the trade war. You messed up. So what I would say is that over the next 12 months, I think we're going to see less and less trade and globalization talk. I think this is it. This is it. This is it. You know, poor Switzerland got stuck with a 30 some odd percent.
Sucks for them.
Sucks for them. You know, they'll survive somehow. You know, they'll survive. They're rich. Canada and Mexico ended up winning. And by the way, they're going to crush it over the next 10 years because everyone's going to move production to Canada and Mexico. Yeah, yeah. So no, there's not going to be any manufacturing moving to America. Sorry, Trump fans, Pokemon fan, whatever. Yeah, you're wrong. You know, you're going to light yourself fire, buddy. Americans are not going to be sewing their own jeans. Duh. So on those issues, I think over the next 12 months, I think Trump is going to have to eat an L. But that also means that I think he will double down and triple down on the things that on this chart are going well. And those are immigration, returning America to its values, which means more sort of anti-woke kind of stuff. And then, more deployment to National Guards and cities. And then finally, the one here that doesn't get a lot of pickup, but reducing cost of the government.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually one of the highest supported in February. I think people genuinely responded to Doge positively. And this is, again, liberal bias of the media. They went after Doge and Elon Musk. Now, the support for that one has dropped to 46%, but it's not in the low 40s, number one. Number two, I think the reason it's dropped is that I think, this is just my view, I don't think it's that people don't like what they're cutting. I actually don't think that. So if you're a professor of like philosophy right now saying like, yeah, they want me to have my job. No, they don't. They don't want you to have your job. I think it's because the American people have not seen enough of it happen. So I actually think there's a zeitgeist change in America where the median voter actually wants to see less government spending. By the way, I think there's a zeitgeist change across the world, maybe just not in France. Something to put a pin on and talk about later. But the issue is that I do think that it's not that voters don't like the way Trump. I don't think that they don't like how much he tried to cut. I think they don't like the fact that Doge has been largely, it disappeared. It's not in the news anymore, and they feel that hasn't happened enough. The other one is foreign policy, foreign affairs. Again, President Trump started with pretty positive polling at 48%. He's now dropped to 44%. I don't think the foreign policy, I think there might be a little bit of Israel. You know, there's a MAGA revolt against Israel. Maybe some of that is in that number, the Israel-Hamas issue. But I think it also maybe tariffs and trade are clouding that. There might be some cross-pollination there. Anyways, his foreign policy, I think, is holding up, I would say, even though it has slid. So, in conclusion, next 12 months, I think he triples down on what's green on this chart, which is immigration, returning America to its values, and fighting crime in America's cities. And I think the media is going to continue to self-immolate on these issues and say that he's, becoming an authoritarian neo-fascist. And the reality is that voters actually support his performance on these issues at 10% higher than anything else. And that anything else is mainly the economy, tariffs, and trade, where he's going to have to take an L that probably leads to an L in the
That
midterms.
I think is the key point, because if you go back and look at, the polling between Harris and Trump, it looked like a very close race. 538 has a toss of everything else. But one of the things that I looked at, and one of the reasons I thought Trump was going to win, and I said so before, it's not normal for me to what was the word I was trying to? It's not normal for me to try to make a prediction about a U.S. election, but I did this last time around because I said, look at all the polling. Yes, it's close on a lot of different issues, and Harris is even ahead on some issues. But look at on the handling of the economy issue. Trump was on every single state 9 to 10 points ahead of her every single time, and it goes back to it's the economy, stupid. So if we look at the poll that you talked about, he's gone from 49% approval rating on the economy in February 2025 to 44% in August 2025. And things have been okay. Like inflation has not really been that bad. He's been, muscling the Fed into cutting rates. Like things are going okay. But I think the long-term impact of some of these own goals that you talked about is coming over the next 12 months. If you look at manufacturing in the United States, it's contracted for a 6th consecutive month. And at least some of the clients and companies that I talk to, they're all talking a big game about nearshoring and things like that. Nobody's actually doing it. Everybody's waiting for policy transparency.
Why would you? Why would you? You're just going to move to Canada and Mexico because they're not going to have any higher tariffs after USMCA is quietly approved in August of
Yeah.
2026. And this is my fearless forecast right here. Like, Canada and Mexico are going to win the trade war. The irony of what President Trump, like, when we write the story of the trade war 10 years from now, it will be that President Trump made Canada and Mexico into superpowers. Why? Because he made it very, very difficult for the Indians and the Chinese and the Malaysians to send stuff to America directly. They have to go through Mexico and Canada, because by the time USMCA comes up for renegotiations, Jacob, you're going to be 4 months away from midterms. And no one's going to want to hear peep out of the White House about tariffs. Like a peep. There's going to be a whole bunch of red congressmen and women and senators in Midwest states who depend on trade with Canada and Mexico. And they're going to tell President Trump, you need to shut the fuck up on trade policy right now. Like, you slap 20% tariffs to Canada over this, they're going to retaliate because they know it's 4 months to the election. And I'm going to lose my seat in Michigan, in North Dakota, in Montana, in Nevada. Like, this is like, we cannot do this. We can't play this game. So one thing I want to say is I have a lot of sympathy for the Trump administration. I actually think they are correct on tariffs not being inflationary. Inflation is not about prices today. It's about prices really in a year from now. And there is no fiscal support in the US economy. So when you raise the price of an iPhone, people are going to have to pay for that iPhone out of their budget for restaurants, for hotels, for travel, for other things, for food. And so the actual increase in prices of goods is ultimately going to be disinflationary. So when Scott Bessent tries to explain this to journalists, he is correct. Tariffs are not going to be inflationary in the long run. However, they of course are inflationary for the goods that are being tariffed. Of course, like in the near term, the prices are going to rise once, and then they're not going to rise again. So the Trump administration is correct. The problem is that they're being nerds. They're being nerds, and they're going to get killed because of that. And what I mean by that is, like, nerds are like, hey, yeah, but on a 12-month rate of change, like, it's going to be disinflationary. Yeah, you're right. But Washington Post, New York Times, the Boston Globe, but also the Austin American Statesman and the Dallas Star, like every single newspaper in the world is going to be reporting all the goods that are rising in prices. And unfortunately for you, November 2026 falls very much outside of the, like, oh, well, inflation is coming back down. Like, I mean, it might just start happening. Voters are going to punish the Trump administration because the voter, it does not look at 12-month rate of change. Voters not looking on a 5-year forward. 99% of our listeners don't have any idea what that is, and that's cool. Don't worry about it. Don't look it up, honestly. It's nerdy. It's not going to matter. What's going to matter is what happened to my iPhone calls, what happened to a pen. Oh my God, my kids are going to school next year in August of 2026. You're going to go to Target, if it still exists. You're going to go to Walmart. You're going to try to buy some goods for your children. There's going to be super expensive, and you're going to be pissed. And you're going to be like, I elected you because Joe Biden messed this up and you fucked it up. And there's no way to explain that to the American people. And the problem, it's funny because Donald Trump is always anti-nerd in a way. That's why he wins. He's being nerdy on this. By trying to argue that tariffs are disinflationary in the long run, he is absolutely mathematically correct. Any person who disagrees with me is a Trump derangement syndrome person. They don't know how math works and how finance and economics works. Tariffs are not inflationary, not without a fiscal backstop to support higher prices, which we don't have. However, the problem is no one's going to care, and voters are going to kill him for it. And you can see that on this chart. Handling inflation, by the way, I have Biden's support from January 2025 on this as an anchor for some of the issues. He was at 34% on handling inflation. So you might say, well, when President Trump was elected, his handling of inflation was pretty low at 45. Yeah, but he was 11 points higher than Joe Biden. This is why he won. That and immigration are the two things where he had the highest jump relative to Biden and therefore Harris. And he's now down to 41% handling of inflation. Still higher than 34% for Joe Biden, but like, I'm telling you, in 12 months, he's going to be at like 38, 37, even though it's kind of unfair. even though it's kind of unfair, the truth is, like, what were you thinking? Of course, human beings who buy widgets are going to think you're messing up inflation because prices went up, and you are going to get destroyed in the midterms, which is why I don't think that California redistricting matters. I think Texas can redistrict all they want. They're going to need a whole lot more than 5 seats.
Yeah.
To hold off what's going to happen to them.
You know, to the nerdiness comment, it's sort of like the operation was a success, but the patient died. That old truism. But there's 2 other things I wanted to say in response to that, because there's the manufacturing data, but the one that really concerns me is just look at electricity costs all around the United States. Like oil prices are low, natural gas prices are low, that's cool. But electricity prices for Americans are increasing by leaps and bounds, 10 to 20% almost across the board in every single state. There are very few states that are less than 10% increases in electricity price. And some of that has to do with AI and the data centers and a bunch.
No, wait.
Yeah,
let me stop you there. Sorry.
All of it has to do.
All of it has to do with AI. And it has to do with AI because we're searching for dumb things. You know, I got shamed on Twitter because what I do every month is I post the cover of my monthly reports. My monthly reports are written for my clients in the financial industry. There's a whole lot of stuff in those reports that we don't talk about on these podcasts because then I wouldn't be able to sell my reports. So that's where our financial market calls are. I use AI to generate those. We have a layout and design team at BCA Research, and they do an incredible, shout out to Kira. Kira is the best layout and design person on the planet, and has been forever. And so I give them an idea and they create this incredible cover based on my idea. So we did a cover I just wrote about, with our commodity and energy team at BCA Research. Shout out to Rukaya and her team. We just wrote a report on energy prices and electricity prices in AI. And I used a very hungry caterpillar.
That's great.
You know, I mean, you have young kids. So I use that as the cover. It's like very hungry AI. And some guy goes on Twitter, he's like, hey man, you do realize that creating that cover took as much electricity as running your fridge for a day. And I was just like, ooh, man, I just got green shamed. But it's true. It's true. Every time you create a fake song for your buddy's birthday, every time you go and like create some art meme, every time you Google, like, I'm in New Orleans for 3 days and Jacob doesn't want to answer my text, what should I do? You know, like every time that happens, like you kill a small iceberg somewhere in Greenland. You know, this does take a massive amount of electricity, and it's not actually improving our productivity yet. Right now, we're mostly using AI for like tourism, for art covers, and for happy birthday anniversary songs.
Yeah. I agree with you. And I just wanted to say.
So everybody, like, you were trying to make a point about inflation. I'm sorry.
Please, you're here to cook. I just want to say, like, I think there's trouble brewing in some, like, you know, markets look good and some things look good, but like that electricity data would scare the crap out of me if I was in the Trump administration. And if we're trying to think what's going to happen in 12 to 24 months, I responded to your chart with a chart of my own, which is Gallup looking at U.S. party affiliation from 1988 to 2024. And it's basically, you've got roughly equal numbers of Republicans, Independents, and Democrats in the electorate until 2008. And starting in 2008, you get a big spike in independents. You get higher numbers for Democrats until, you know, roughly 2020. And then it's funny, for the last 2 years, like the people who identify, at least according to Gallup, as Democrats or Republicans has been identical. It's 28% apiece. And over 42% of the electorate are identifying as independents. And I raise that because if you are thinking about what's going to happen 12, 24, 36 months from now, I think what you're seeing is that, yes, Trump has a very animated base that supports him, and they are the ones that are identifying as Republican. And yes, the woke left, the radical left, has a very animated base that cares very deeply about all the issues that the far right doesn't want anything to do with. But over 42%. No, okay. Time out, please.
Well, nobody wants anything to do with.
Yes, nobody. Exactly right. But for over 42% of Americans are sitting there in the middle waiting for someone to serve them something other than what they're getting. And I think a lot of those independents were willing to go along with Trump the second time around because they thought Harris was a train wreck. They thought that Biden was mentally not there, and he obviously wasn't, and inflation, all the other things. If the economy is going to turn on the Republicans under a Trump administration, that's all up for grabs. And I say that because now we're in a very interesting political environment, because you've got, as you pointed out, people who want Doge, who want to cut costs, who want to be less profligate. On the other side, you're going to have the populists. You're going to have the Bernie Sanders guys who are out there who say, no, we're going to do more. We're going to expand the social safety net. We're going to tax the wealthy, and we're going to do all these things. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because if we're right about some of these economic things, and maybe we're not, maybe the Trump administration has this figured out, maybe we're going to have a Bitcoin treasury and everything's going to be fine. But if these indicators are going to go the direction that we're talking about, then it's going to be up for grabs. And it could be a Vance trajectory thing. It could be a Bernie trajectory thing. It could be a populism, like a melange of populism that we haven't even figured out yet. But I think the center is going to be up for grabs in a really meaningful way. And I think politics, again, if we're right about the economic indicators, domestic politics in the United States is going to look completely different. And so to your point, if you're a US company and you're trying to think about, what changes do I make in terms of where I'm manufacturing? You shouldn't do anything. You want to wait to see where things fall right now, because there is a ton of uncertainty and instability coming down the road. And that's how I would think about this if I was in India. That's how I would think about this if I was a US company. It's how I would think about it if I was Mark Carney. I think we're getting to the end of this phase where the honeymoon is going to go, if the economic data is right. If I'm wrong about the economic data, then we're talking Trump 3.0 probably, or at least Trump's handpicked successor and anything else. But the data looks bad to me.
So brilliant. Thank you for cooking on that. That was awesome. I want to unpack so many things. First of all, you shouted out Mark Carney. Mark Carney just needs to shut the fuck up. And by the way, he's gonna win. He just needs to be he mentioned in his press conference, because he was being attacked by journalists in Canada who were like, hey, what happened to elbows up? Just let them be mean to you, Mark. Don't tell them that Canada has the lowest tariff in the world vis-a-vis the US. Don't say that. Don't say it publicly. Just close your mouth. Just close your beautiful mouth and say, yes, I had to do elbows down. His actual hockey analogy was perfect. He was like, sometimes it's in a game, you got to drop the gloves. Sometimes you have to stick handle. That's enough. Don't quote stats. Don't quote data. Don't tell people you won, because you did. Just be quiet and let it ride out, because 12 months from now, when that USMCA comes up for renegotiations, or 8 months from now, you're going to end up winning. But, and so well done. Mark Carney crushed it. And we've had him very high in our list, by the way, and we were correct. Again, please don't talk about this. Right? You don't have to tell the world you won, because you did. The thing about economic data, I think actually we're not going to have a recession in the next 12 months. And let's talk about it in 12 months time. I think that Trump can avoid a recession. I just don't think that matters, Jacob. You can have sentiment be pretty negative even if we avoid a recession. So do we need a recession for a new president in 2028? Well, remember, in 2024, we didn't have a recession. We didn't have a recession in 2023. We had a slowdown in 2022, which actually didn't help Republicans in the midterms that much. So Biden didn't lose because the economic data got super bad. In fact, inflation was collapsing.
Yeah, but he lost it in 22 when he was already cooked on the data, and then he was this guy who couldn't complete a sentence. But yes, I agree with you. I'm sorry. Yeah.
All I'm saying is if growth average is 1.5% over the next 3 years and inflation is at 2.5%, I don't think that's good enough for Trump or his successors. And that brings me to the last point, which is what you're making. I don't think that Trump and Trumpism is defeated necessarily just because of economic data. Economic data can be mushy. The problem is the other point you made, which is really good point. This is really critical. And I think that everyone's going to ignore it. The lessons that the Democrats are going to take from the midterms will be the wrong lessons. The lessons from the New York City mayoral race is going to be the wrong lesson. And the lesson Republicans are going to take from 2024 are going to be the wrong lessons. And the lesson is people just want somebody who's common sense, centrist, and gets stuff done. And so I can imagine, for example, primary for the Republican Party in 2027. there's going to be this national equilibrium of people trying to vie for who's going to take the Trumpism mantle after Trump. I don't think he's going to run for the third term. No way. No, it's just not going to happen. But you're going to have 5, 6, 7 people who are going to say, I'm the true heir to the Trumpist future, led by J.D. Vance, obviously, and a couple of other people. And I think they're going to create a national equilibrium, which is this suboptimal outcome where everybody kind of goes for the same thing. And some 7th or 8th candidate on that stage is going to say, like, no, I'm the opposite. I'm going to run as a moderate centrist Republican. Everyone's going to make fun of him. The media is going to say, you're so stupid, and that person is going to win. Or what's going to happen is I'm wrong. The Republican primary will produce the Trump 3.0 sort of candidate. The Democratic Party primary will produce someone who's like, oh, look what Mamdani did in New York. I'm going to do it nationally. And then we're going to open ourselves up for an Emmanuel Macron moment in America. And I truly think that today there is this opening for third-party candidates, partly because it's so much easier to raise money. If you think about, like, Ross Perot was the last third-party candidate that did anything. And he didn't do much, but at least he won like 20% of the vote. And he did that because he was a billionaire. He had to like self-finance this thing. And it was really difficult to finance yourself back in those days. But now you can go online. I mean, Donald Trump, everybody thinks he ran for president in the first time because he was a billionaire. No, he maximized those $50 checks. He used the Bernie Sanders playbook from 2020. And he correctly replicated it. He was, financed by a lot of small checks. You can do that today because you can just have a campaign online. The second thing you can do, Ross Perot was completely banned from all the TV networks. They thought he was just an idiot. They didn't want to have him on. They didn't give him the airtime. Today, who the hell watches any of these morons online? I watched Fareed Zakaria, who I used to respect, spewing nonsense about the Alaska summit. Who cares? More people listen to us than they watch Fareed Zakaria, for God's sakes. And that's important. We're clowns. You know what I mean? So what I'm getting at is that it's much easier to access media, independent media. You can go Joe Rogan. That's more important than going on, Cristiano Amanpour. You got to be like a CFR member to actually watch Amanpour. Just 4 people watching her and be like, that was excellent. Whereas, Joe Rogan handed the presidency to Trump in many ways, right? So there is going to be much easier path for someone to just say, F it, I'm going to break with both parties. So I think that you are absolutely correct. I think both parties are going to over-index on their basis, on that 25% zealotry on the tails of American spectrum. And then they're going to miss the median voter who's probably just like, hey, man, we need solutions. We need solutions. So somebody who says, look, we need to secure the border. There are too many illegal immigrants, but I don't know. I don't want an armed militia loyal to the president getting $50K bonuses to run around American cities, picking up
Also,
people.
I want somebody to be able to replace the roof on my house when I ask for it. So we're going to have to find a happy medium.
Yeah, oh man, don't get me started on that. I got so many examples of that, of stuff just failing here in Santa Monica. Because of ICE. But look, what I would say is that you can have what's very problematic in the US today is that people like you and I are just, they don't have platforms. And what I mean by that is you can hold 2 thoughts in your head that at the same time fit in the Republican and Democratic camp. And that is something that's, shamed in most public forums. What we have actually done is the opposite of what On Liberty says, what J.S. Mill says. We have actually abrogated the true kind of liberalism, which is the foundation of Western, modern freedom of speech. And we have silenced the people who actually can hold both a conservative and a liberal thought at the same time in the head. And that is creating an exploding dynamic where at some point, someone is going to just come out. They're going to be moderately good at their job, and they're going to win because they're, sane. And that's what happened in France. You had Emmanuel Macron in the top 25. I don't think I even did.
No,
maybe I did. I didn't. Because I'm like, but he's just meh. And you're like,
Meh.
yeah, but like May is good enough, kind of. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So what was the guy from Minnesota again? What was his name?
Yeah, Walls, whatever. I mean, like, I talked to a lot of Minnesotans. I spent a lot of time in Minnesota. And across the board, people didn't really like him.
Dean Phillips. We can't even, we do this for a living, Jacob. We can't remember the man's
Who's Dean Phillips?
name. Dean Phillips. Listen, if Dean Phillips runs in 2028, he's going to win. You know what I mean? Do you have a pulse? Yes. Do you think the far left nonsense is bullshit? Yes. Do you think the far right bullshit is nonsense? Yes. You're good enough.
And will you not charge hundreds and thousands of dollars so that somebody can come and also not make people buy, millions of dollars of your shit coin in order to get for the
And you're less than 60 years old. Are you less? Could you play a pickleball match and win? Yes.
All right, we got to get you out of here in 3 minutes. So first, something self-serving. I'd be really interested to see a cross-section of like who's listening to us versus who's also listening to Joe Rogan. And I will say to Mr. Rogan or to any of the listeners that are listening, his only geopolitics guy he's had on is Peter Zeihan. So if y'all listen to Joe Rogan at all, y'all need to start peppering him with comments and things like that and tell him to bring the cousins on because he needs some...
We need the
Rogan bump. He needs a real geopolitical education. It's a match made in heaven. Let's do it. It makes a lot of sense.
It is. We introduced comedy into serious subjects. I mean, this is what he does.
Anyway, but you've got 2 minutes to cook, Marko. Anything you want to say before you get out of here? Because I know you got a long day of travel ahead of you.
Let me see. I think. Well, look, I'm just glad we're back. I will say in the last 2 minutes, we haven't talked about basketball a lot. And I know that people are like, well, it's August. Nobody talks about basketball. Bill Simmons talked about football. Yes, but I'm actually disappointed. I'm disappointed in Zach Lowe. I'm disappointed in Russillo. I'm disappointed in Bill Simmons because something extraordinary is happening. And for $30, you can participate in it too. Download the 1891 app on your phone, pay $30, and you can watch every single EuroBasket game live. They're during the day. Here on the West Coast, they're during the morning. I often have them on during internal management meetings. Yes, shout out to my team at BC Research. This is what I'm doing while I'm listening and pretending that...
The Sam Bankman-Fried of geopolitics, ladies and gentlemen. Look at him. Look at him go.
This is what I'm doing. No, but we had a Serbia versus Turkey game. Yesterday. And it was a fascinating game. It was incredible. I mean, Jacob, it was like legitimately one of the best basketball games of the last two years. It was just close, back and forth. Turkey ended up winning, but it cared more, I have to say. The Turks also cared more in 1389. Shout out history. And the way they cared more is that, they played Shane Larkin 39 minutes. Şengün played 37. Jokic played 30. The Serbian coach clearly was kind of like, I think, play possum. You might remember he did that in the Olympics as well, and played Jokic like 75 minutes in the U.S. game, which, cost the game ultimately. But nonetheless, the point is the tournament is stacked. It's a great reflection of multipolarity. I mean, France has 7 NBA players and they suck. Actually, Germany, you've got FIBA Schroeder, who is just unstoppable. Dennis Schroeder in FIBA, he's just like a different human being. They've got the Wagner twins, who are somehow bullies in Europe. It works, And then Turkey, young squad, generational transition. Shedi Osman is still there, really good. Serbia just lost their second best player, Bogi, unfortunately. So less of a favorite than they were maybe a week ago, but still very dangerous with Jokic, obviously, just crushing it. And then Greece with Giannis. I mean, it is just a stacked tournament. And then my favorite is when you have a kind of a bad team, but they've got an incredible superstar like Finland with Markkanen. Just fun to see Doncic playing with guys like me and you. Jacob, Slovenia is a small country. It's tough for them to field, 12 extremely good players, although they did when they won the EuroBasket a couple of years ago, and that was awesome. But Doncic is out there trying to do his best, getting frustrated because his teammates are playing in the second Portuguese league. So anyways, it's a fascinating tournament with lots of storylines, and I would highly recommend.
Well, and I think we should resolve to be successful enough in 4 years so that 4 years from now in August, not only will I not have pneumonia, but we will spend all of August in Europe doing EuroBasket analysis while also doing our geopolitical analysis. I think that's done.
I think that'd be awesome. By the way, my goal in life is to buy a team in Europe. I already identified which one. I don't want to say it because I don't want to bid up the price. But I'm buying a team, Jacob. I'm buying a team. It's going to be in a nice, warm location. Okay. Only hint. Olive oil is really good.
Stop giving it away. I can tell you want to tell them what it is. You can't. You got to keep it to yourself.
I do, but I don't want to. Anyways, the point is, this is my dream in life. In 30 years, Jacob, you and I are courtside in an arena, probably 2,000 to 5,000 fans. That's all we need. And just, living the life. And hopefully being caught on hot mic discussing.
Organ transplants. Yeah. At this rate, I'm going to need some new lungs. So, all right, man, get out of here. I'll talk to you later.